All right, I think we'll go ahead and get started this morning. I didn't want to cut off too much conversation because I know that networking is way more important than the slides we have. But I'm extremely pleased to be here. My name is Jerry Roche. I'm with the Federal Highway Administration. I work in the Office of Safety, and I'm the team lead for our EDC4 innovation called Data-Driven Safety Analysis. We actually started on our EDC3, and we'll talk a little bit about some of the successes we've seen so far, and we're excited to have another 2 years to really institutionalize this practice in state and local agencies. So I'm excited to be here as well. I work out of the Iowa Division Office still, even though I work for DC. And so it's excellent to see so many great partners from the Midwest that I've worked with before. So we have a lot, wealth of information in this room. So we've got some slides that we're going to share with you today. But I really want to just have the center of the conversation about what you guys want to talk about. So the presentation will be made available to you. We're also being recorded today, so it'll be available as a recording as well if you have others that in your office. But we want to make sure you guys have a chance to talk about what you guys want to talk about. So we'll go ahead and get started. We'll begin with introductions in just a moment. Then we'll move on to kind of an overview of data-driven safety analysis. And then we're going to spend some time talking about how data-driven safety analysis can be implemented throughout the project development process. So we'll talk and show some state examples from planning, alternatives analysis. We're also going to hear from Victor Lund, who's going to talk a little bit about how they're using the systemic approach in Minnesota. We are in probably the leader in systemic approach to safety, and so it's excellent. You'll also be seeing a video at lunch, actually, on the systemic approach highlighting Minnesota, so that'll be its debut. Then we'll move on to alternatives analysis, design, and construction operations and maintenance. So we'll also talk just a little bit about the resources that are available under DDSA and some of the opportunities that you might want to take advantage of. So I'm going to give just a brief overview of kind of what's going on, the lay of the land, if you will. None of this is going to be earth-shattering to you folks. You guys all know what's going on. We certainly are seeing shrinking budgets, right? We're all dealing with not having enough funds to do what we want to do. We've got growing lists of needs. Sometimes we have competing priorities, right? We've got aging bridges, we've got safety concerns out there, we've got pavement that needs to be rehabilitated. We've also got increasing fatalities. So in 2015, we saw a 7.2% increase in traffic fatalities nationwide. That was the highest increase in the last 50 years. And so that's got a lot of people concerned. 2016 really is not looking very good, folks. So maybe that plays what we're doing here a little bit. So. And we're also establishing safety performance measures, right? And not just safety performance measures, but performance measures in all different areas. And so we've got more people interested in what we're doing, right? And more people asking some questions. So I think that makes it more important than what we're doing. And so one of the things that we're supposed to do is incorporate safety into all of our projects, right? To a level that's the most practical and feasible on all of our roadways. And so that's something that's in the federal regulations. It's something that Congress certainly thinks that we should do. I think the traveling public probably expects us to do that as well. And so we really need to know how a road's going to perform before we build it or before we rebuild it. And so we really need a crystal ball, and I think that's where data-driven safety analysis really fits into what we're doing. So our goal is to integrate safety performance into all transportation investments. So sidewalk projects, innovative projects, you name it. There's probably a component there where safety performance has an element to that project. And so we want to try and harness that opportunity because so we're only touching projects one time, right, when we go out there. We believe that we can make more informed decision making. We'll show some examples of that. That'll help us target our investments to those areas that really need it, which will reduce our fatalities and serious injuries on the whole, right, nationwide. And so that's what we're pushing. Data-driven safety analysis is the application of the latest evidence-based tools and approaches to safety analysis. There's a plethora of things that we'll talk about here today. And it provides reliable estimates of an existing or a proposed roadway's expected safety performance. So, and it really helps us quantify those safety impacts, right? How we've quantified all the other decisions that we make, things like traffic growth, environmental impacts, traffic operations, pavement life, and construction costs. So really now safety has a voice or an equal voice to be part of those decisions, really not moving from the qualitative to the quantitative, and we'll talk more about that. This actually comes from Utah DOT. As Michael mentioned, we're kind of in the data world, and I put myself in the data geek category firmly. But a lot of times we're not always the best about using our information, and this was something that got put out where Utah saw these new advanced methods as really a game changer in traffic safety. So I mentioned the Highway Safety Manual just briefly in introductions. That's really our foundational element, was the Highway Safety Manual that was published in 2010. That was based on decades of research that were done by Transportation Research Board, Federal Highway Administration, AASHTO, even state DOTs that played a huge role in that. We're on our first edition, so there's a lot of good things in there. There are more good things to come, and Priscilla chairs the team that's working on the second edition of the Highway Safety Manual right now. So that came out in 2010. There was the freeways interchanges chapters were added just in 2014. So really the vision for the Highway Safety Manual was similar to the Highway Capacity Manual. We wanted something that was definitive, that represented the state-of-the-art information, something that was widely accepted amongst the transportation profession, and something that was updated regularly to reflect current research. And so for those that aren't familiar with the Highway Capacity Manual, the first edition of that was published in 1950. So we have a little catching up to do. There are certainly new models that are still being developed, but lots of good things in there. So the Highway Safety Manual has resulted in a lot of development of tools such as spreadsheets. We've got software products, some that are state developed, some commercially available, some that have been developed by Federal Highway Administration. There's a number of guidance documents out there to help implement these tools. And then we also have the Crash Modification Factors Clearinghouse. It's an online live repository for all the new safety research related to crash modification factors for different elements that are on our website. So we've had a lot of progress. As I mentioned, we started under EDC 3. We've seen a number of states. We've got 37 states that have tried these tools on one project or more in their agencies. And so our goal really in EDC 4 is to move a lot of the state DOTs to the assessment level or above, where it's getting into your policies and procedures. You mentioned you talked about policies and procedures, so hopefully there's a role there for data-driven safety analysis to be incorporated better there. We also want to get a lot of the local agencies and tribal agencies to demonstrate these tools or try them if they haven't used them. So we'll hear more about that today. So really, where can DDSA fit into the project development process? We hope throughout, and we'll talk about some of these things. Realize that the project development process, there's probably 52 versions of that around the country, right? So every agency has their own version of that, but we'll talk about some things that we feel that fit in planning, alternatives analysis, design, and then also construction operations and maintenance. So we'll talk just a little bit about planning. And those that are in planning, feel free to weigh in. If you've got other ideas, things that you disagree with or agree with, let us know. We feel that DDSA tools can be applied to help identify which roadways aren't performing as they should, help determine the scope and need of projects, and also help prioritize them. So we'll touch on that just briefly here. We'll talk about system level planning and network screening. When we talk about network screening, that's our safety geeks talking about how can we see how these, determine those locations that will benefit the most from safety improvements. And so you see here that the steps aren't all that unique, really. It's establish the focus, identify the network that we want to focus on, select our performance measures, and then screen the system and evaluate it. So we're seeing a lot of changes. We're moving from those traditional screening methods. If you've all heard of things like you're just looking at crash frequency or maybe crash weight. Hey, this project has 80 million crashes per 100 million vehicle miles, which is lower or higher than the statewide average. Well, that doesn't really tell us how it's truly performing. It doesn't tell us how that road's really expected to perform based on the traffic volume, the situation that it's in, the context of the roadway. So we're seeing a lot of agencies move to more advanced performance measures, things like excess predicted average crash frequency, the level of service of safety, a potential for safety improvement, and also systemic sites with promise. So we're going to talk more about that. Right now, we're going to bring up Victor Lund, who's the traffic engineer for St. Louis County, Minnesota.
Well, good morning. I'm glad to be here, and actually I really appreciate the invitation. There's nothing special about St. Louis County. We are a large county geographically, but we're just a county that's willing to try risk. And I think that's really important as we look at data-driven safety analysis, willing to try to risk different things. St. Louis County, if you're not familiar with it, it's in northeast Minnesota. It's the largest county east of the Mississippi River. We're about 60 miles wide by 120 miles north to south. We border Canada. We have 3,000 miles of county roads. An average county in Minnesota has about 500 to 800 miles. We have about 600 bridges. We have a pretty large infrastructure. The focus is safety. I want to give you an overview of how our mindset has changed in St. Louis County through the data-driven safety analysis. The customer is the traveling public. Excuse me, I'm a little just taken by just the enormity of the task here. Just give me just a second. The safety is a customer, and their priority is their safety. I'm reminded of this summer I had a trip from Twin Cities to the Duluth airport, and took 3 trips for the airplane to get from Minneapolis to Duluth with fog. I thought about that, saying the airline was willing to spend 3 travel times to bring us, the same group of customers, back to Duluth safely. Well, gee, we should be thinking that way in the public highway level. Improving safety requires a data-driven approach. It is not a slogan. It really requires data. Hope is not an engineering strategy. We can't just hope our way out of crashes. And boy, there's a lot of that that I deal with. The goal is towards 0 deaths, not towards 0 crashes. We will never eliminate crashes. That's not my goal as a traffic engineer, to eliminate crashes. And that's counterintuitive, because the public thinks that we need to eliminate crashes. No, it's eliminate serious crashes. That's our goal, and I'm going to talk about that briefly. And then leveraging a multidisciplinary approach through the 4 E's here in Minnesota, or the 5 E's if you want to include everyone, but really having those partnerships between law enforcement, educators, and engineers, as well as even emergency responders. There is a relationship between the emergency responders and even the engineers. The reason I show you this graph is because our focus is serious crashes. It's not all crashes, it's just the K&A crashes. You know, we've had some success in St. Louis County. We've kind of hit a plateau over the last 5 or 7 years, but we're still focused on driving that number towards 0. But again, the focus is K&A crashes. The public perception, I battle this continuously as a traffic engineer. For those traffic engineers in the room, you will appreciate this this notion. Highway agencies wait for enough crashes to pile up, and then they may do something about it. That's the public perception. The agency perception is not much different. It says, well, let's wait for those crashes to pile up. We'll do some moderate to high cost safety projects based on a benefit cost justification. That's the traditional approach. Now, I'm not here to say the traditional approach is bad, because we have to use that, and I would argue, a comprehensive approach to traffic safety. But a traditional only approach, underline the word only, I think there's consequences to that. These are the consequences that we've personally experienced in St. Louis County. How many people have to die before you do something? How many times have you heard that if you're a traffic engineer? I hear that on a regular basis, because the public's perception is we're just waiting for things to happen, and then we go into a reactive mode. Distracted engineering. There's political emphasis, there's political push, if you will, to get you to look at something where it may not be the real problem. We battle that continuously. Drain on resources. I'm always reacting to these things, and I'm not really able to put my focus on where it should be, and no system-wide accomplishments. I would argue, if you look at the data, you know, the last 20 years, we've been in a traditional approach, and we're still dealing with these issues. But the focus I want to get you to bring to mind is, it's a traditional only approach is, where do we invest our safety projects on our system? There simply aren't enough serious crashes across the system to justify any one specific safety project. It's a low density. It's a density issue. Think about this. 50% of the severe crashes on the running off the road on the greater Minnesota occur on curves, but 75% of those curves have had no crashes in the last 5 years. Not serious crashes, just total crashes. There's been no crashes, period. In fact, the County Road Safety Plan that we just did in Minnesota, it wrapped up in 2012, 2013. It found no such thing as dead man's curve. Dead man's curve does not exist. We analyzed like 20,000 plus curves. Just to prove my point, think about this. On the trunk highway and on the county highway system, which generates the majority, like 90+% in Minnesota, of our serious crashes, look at the crash densities. Move that mouse out of your way. Look at those density is 0.014 fatal crashes per mile. On the county system, almost 0. Multiply that density or that rate times the total mileage in your system, you're not talking about very many fatal crashes. But yet that's our measurement, that's our goal, to eliminate those crashes. So how do we measure success? I want to get us thinking about not total crashes, but serious crashes. Property damage and low severity crashes are scary and frustrating, but I get to come home at night to my wife, to my family. I get to go to my job the next day. I get maybe have my neighbor take me to work, but I still get to go on with my life. Serious crashes, I may not come home ever. I may not be the same person. I may have to have special care provided to me. So I would say that if the elimination or the reduction in serious crashes is the metric, then serious or high severity crashes should be our, quote, yardstick. Fatal or serious crashes lead you to different locations if you look at just serious crashes versus all crashes. In Minnesota, the most common crash is a rear end crash. Those crashes will lead you to high volume signalized corridors. So if you look at just using total crashes as your metric, the problem is those corridors or those areas that generate the most of the crashes in the state of Minnesota only account for 10% of our serious crashes, or actually our fatal crashes. Only 10%. So if we invest a lot of our money at those locations, which are justified by our BC analysis, et cetera, we're only touching 10% of those crashes. We have to look at our greater Minnesota areas where the locations where most of those crashes are happening. It's on the rural 2-lane highways. Just to emphasize that point, 67%, 2/3 of the serious crashes in St. Louis County are just made up of run off the road, right angle, and head-on crashes. They're in the rural locations. None of those crashes are happening in the urban areas, in the Duluth metro area or any of that kind of sort. So, the systemic approach, how are we using it in St. Louis County? I think the systemic approach can be summed up in the first bullet point is the traditional approach says crashes equals risk, no crashes equals no risk. The systemic approach says no crashes does not equal no risk. How often do I have a phone call from somebody on a resident or whomever and will say, why are you putting chevrons on this curve? I've lived here for 50 years, nobody's ever ran off that curve. Well, it's risk. Why are you looking at this rural expressway intersection? It's not that bad of a problem. They ask the question, crashes. Well, what about the risk? Because the risk starts making you think in terms of proactive strategies instead of looking at the traditional reactive approach. One of the things that we can do in leveraging or identifying these locations that are at risk is doing this crash tree approach, which we did in Minnesota. You follow the line down, you actually see the data will lead you to the location. You can see on this chart up here, run off the road crashes on curves is our biggest problem. That's our biggest problem. Just look at this chart real quick. It's a very powerful tool just to help you focus on where our most problems occurring at. Change in direction. We used to think reactively, now we think proactively. We used to think localized, meaning that we're just focused on a specific intersection, a specific corridor, maybe a region within a locality. Now we're thinking on a system-wide approach, a systemic approach. Events-based versus risk-based, instead of waiting for crashes to happen, which are the events, we're looking at risk factors, things that are correlated with those crashes. But the Minnesota experience, this is just a process from the County Road Safety Plan and how we arrived at that plan. Nothing special here, but just the fact that there was a process. It involved looking at the crash data, finding locations that were most of the serious crashes were occurring, finding those risk factors that were associated with those serious crash locations, finding that list of strategies that we can implement, those safety strategies, ranking that system to a short list of project locations, then actually having a list of projects. Risk factors. We identified 7 risk factors in Minnesota. Skew all the way down to total crashes. Notice that total crashes is one of the equivalent risk factors. It's not 2 stars, 3 stars, it's 1 star. Same as skew. Same as if it's near a river crossing. We could then generate a list of those locations that are at most at risk by a star ranking system, for like a better way to say it. You can see the number of stars tells us where are those locations that we should be focusing on. Effectiveness of strategies. After we identify those locations, we have to find those list of strategies that work. Proven down to experimental are the 3 types of classifications that NCHRP provides us. We want to put our money in those proven strategies. If we need to, we can do experimental, but we really want to find those proven strategies. Chevron signs on curves, those are proven. Rumble strips on edge lines, proven. Intersection lighting, proven. So we're going to have a lot of projects that have those types of elements. And here we are. Chevrons, lighting, rumble strips, even the wide edge lines, the white reflective edge lines. This is where our money is being put at. It's based on those safety strategies that are proven, for the most part. Here's some pictures in St. Louis County. You can see intersection lighting. The lower right corner picture is my favorite picture of the 4. Why? Because there's 3 different elements: chevron signs, rumble strips, and the wide edge lines. Those projects, and one thing real quick, they didn't all happen at the same time. It took some time for processing here in terms of finding the funding, getting the projects put together. So don't be discouraged by saying, I can't do all those 3 things at once. They all arrived on scene at different times, over different years, but yet here we have them. So then we have these project sheets that we were able to put together, and very powerful tools, because then we could identify what the location was like, the characteristics, what are the risk factors, and recommended safety projects with estimated costs for those projects that were recommended. So then we can start doing budgeting. We can start assembling priorities on what projects should we be doing next. People ask me a lot, well, tell me about the systemic approach. What's different about it? And I say, well, doctors have been doing this for a long time. Think about this. You go to your doctor, they ask you a bunch of questions. What's your personal health history? What's your family health history? What's your diet? What are your hobbies or your behavior type of stuff, behavioral stuff? The doctor is using that information to assess your risk for future diseases. If my great-grandfather, grandfather, my dad all had prostate cancer in their 50s, that probably puts me at an elevated risk for having prostate cancer over the average male. Well, that would be good information to know, because then I could be more focused on preventing that, or being prepared for that event if it were to happen. The safety plan really also did another thing for us. It was a springboard for action into our normal capital improvement projects. I had a phone call about 2 weeks ago with a lady on a project that we just repaved this highway. We put rumble strips on it. We were able to put rumble strips on it because we actually extended the pavement width about an extra 1.5 feet on each side of the roadway to find a platform to put those rumble strips in. And so she called me off and said, well, we're concerned about the noise. And her first thought was, have there been run off the road crashes? Well, no, there hasn't been. Well, why are you doing it? Because it's a risk. Well, there's been no crashes. I said, think about it this way. 95% of the St. Louis County highway system does not require centerline striping according to the MUTCD. Should we just eliminate that? No. We don't even think twice about it in our project management side of, we put a centerline stripe down the roadway. It's just the way we do business. So what we're trying to do is infuse these things into our projects so that an edgeline rumble strip is not a novel idea. It's just the way we do business. A safety edge is not a novel idea. It's just the way we do business. Just like putting a stripe on the roadway. And what is this slide about? I apologize. This might be a random slide. Yes, the County Road Safety Plan update. How could I forget? Sorry, Brad. We are actually in the process in Minnesota of updating our county road safety plans. And every county, 87 counties in Minnesota, received their own unique plan. Most of the counties have done a tremendous job of actually implementing those projects. 15 counties have been invited into Minnesota to actually go to the next level to update their safety plans. And the focus is going to be a more customized plan for the county that utilizes crash data that looks at the implementation and the results from the County Road Safety Plan Phase 1, a more robust outreach and engagement plan. That's important, that outreach portion, because we're a political entity, we're a public entity, we get public funds. We have to justify these projects. We have to justify our resources, why we're spending our time on these things, to our county boards, to our city councils, and to even sometimes our state representatives. And the focus will always still be on serious crashes or fatal and serious crashes. So what are the concerns of systemic approach? You might be asking, what at the county level, what kind of thoughts do you have from pure county engineers? We did a survey about 3 years ago and got the following feedback, and I can condense it into the bottom 3 points. The agency priority versus the safety plan priority. So sometimes the county engineers were saying, well, what I was thinking was important didn't show up in the safety plan. Legitimate point. It limits my judgment as an engineer, a practicing engineer, understood? And there's lack of political support. While these are not ribbon-cutting projects, they're not a brand new bridge, it's a couple chevron signs on a curve. But there's been tangible results in Minnesota. 2011 is when most of our safety plans were published and started to be implemented. And in wide deployment of those safety strategies. If you look between 2011 and 2015, of the 4 different highway types, county highways, trunk highways, state U.S. highways, and interstates, the county highway system experienced a 25% reduction in its fatality rate since the safety plan robust implementation. Now, I'm not going to stand here and say that because of the county road safety plan that has 100% reason for that reduction. I'm not going to say that. My statistician background couldn't let me say that. However, I think it's a unique coincidence, and I think that we're going to find out how much relationship there was in the next 3 to 5 years if this trend continues. But I think it's a very telling story that we might have struck on something here. The other thing this tells me is that I think we talk about low-hanging fruit. I think the fruit is much lower on the tree than we realize. I really do. Case in point, I get all the crash reports on my desk in St. Louis County that are generated by a sheriff, and to date I can only recall 1 fatal crash on our county highway system this year. We typically have about 7, so I'm missing about 6 crashes, 5 crashes or something like this about this time of year. I don't know where they are. It's interesting too that last year was our most robust implementation of safety projects. We've put 117 curves with chevron signs, 57 intersections with rural intersection lighting, and we have about 150 miles of edgeline rumble strips. I think there might be something going on. I'm not going to say for certain because we have to wait for the final data, but it's interesting. And then validation, why I think this is working. Minnesota, the MnDOT districts just did a district safety plan modeled on the county road safety plan, and used 2009 through 2013 data. The question was asked in our office, hey, let's look at the 2014 and 15 data and see, were we right? For the locations we identified as at risk, using 2009 to 13, were we right? And here's the results. Of all the high-risk intersections that were generated by those district safety plans, this is statewide, those intersections accounted for 47% of the serious crashes in 2014 and 2015. However, those intersections only accounted for 26% of the total intersections of all the districts. So you can say this safely. In Minnesota, our experience is an investment in a minority of the system could have an effect on almost half of the serious crashes. That is powerful. That is powerful. So conclusions. The systemic approach to St. Louis County has helped us build trust with our local officials. I have so much more leeway now with my county board of commissioners, I think, with this county road safety plan than I could ever have had just kind of on my own. You could call them up. I'm serious. It's incredible the trust that we have generated with the Public Works Department with the county road safety plan. I'm impressed. It takes you, gives you advantage for the HSIP program. For those states that are not from Minnesota, I'd encourage you to look at how much HSIP dollars are being shared with your local partners, because in Minnesota we're finding half our serious crashes are on the local system. The local system has to be addressed. I think we're realizing a significant benefit in safety in Minnesota with these safety plans. And hand me another brick. This is my last point. This is a process. When we first started our safety plan implementation in 2011, 2012, I thought, boy, there's a lot of projects in here. It's going to keep me busy for a long time, and it has. And I'm looking forward to our updated version. But it's a step at a time. It's a brick at a time. We're building that wall, and we're just going to continue. Just perseverance. So, with that, I appreciate your attention, and have a great day.
Thanks, Vic. I think it's easy to see his passion that he has for traffic safety, and it's my honor to co-present with a person like Vic. Vic personally takes all complaint calls. If someone calls about runnable strips, he wants those calls to go to him. He doesn't duck that. He takes that as an opportunity to have a conversation with them and educate them the importance of having things like rumble strips on the roadways. So, thank you very much, Vic. All right, I've got just a couple things I'll talk about for planning on the project level that might be of interest. We'll try to get through this quick so I can make sure there's enough time for what Will's going to cover. But one of the things is establishing project scope, and that's an example we have from Colorado State DOT. They have what they call their transportation safety and management and operations evaluation. So any project that they're funding, they want to touch that project once. And so when it's time for that project to come up, one of the things that's analyzed for is safety, along with ITS and traffic operations. And so they identify things up front. If there's safety needs, they look at it. They use one of those network screening processes, so they know if this road is performing well enough compared to its peer facilities. And so they can address it at that time. They found that is very useful for educating their project managers on data-driven safety analysis and identifying these things early on in the process, right? The two things that drive project managers crazy: time and budget, right? If you come to them too late with a safety need, it's going to mess up their timing, it's going to mess up their budget, right? So it needs to be done early in the process. They've done a great job of that. I'll also talk just a little bit about project prioritization, and this might be of interest to folks. This comes from Virginia DOT. They have their Smart Scale program. This was actually from the legislature. They added transportation funding, some state transportation funding, but in return for that funds, they had certain needs or criteria they wanted those projects to be advanced by or analyzed by. And so SCALE stands for safety, congestion mitigation, accessibility, land use, environmental quality, and economic development. And so they show here on this map the red ones, and like the Northern Virginia, that's where they have a lot of congestion. And so those projects get a lot of weight for congestion. On those projects, they get 45%. But the greater part of Virginia, the light blue on this map, are those rural areas where they have safety as a big concern. And so safety gets 30% of the score in those areas versus the congestion areas where they get 5% of the score. They use that information, and then they also come up with a safety score. And so for that, they use what we call a crash modification factor. Normally, we have a crash modification factor for each element. So we look at the shoulder width or the presence of centerline rumble strips. All those things have effects on safety. They take all those things, combine them together, and come up with one number to analyze those projects on. So this happens to be converting a 2-lane road to a 4-lane divided highway. They came up with an overall CMF of 0.8, so a 20% crash reduction if they built this project. They then apply that to the existing crash history that they've seen in the past on that roadway to figure out what effect that would have for their fatal and serious injury crashes. All that gets put in for that safety score, which could be anywhere from 5 to 30%. So just one slide on that. Now we'll talk a little bit about alternatives analysis, and I'll turn that over to Will Stein to cover that.
Thanks, Jerry. Before I guess, get into this, I want to just comment on since Vic was here, some of the success we've been having on the local system. From my perspective, it's a couple things, a really good partnership between some really good county engineers like Vic and MnDOT. And then some credit MnDOT deserves is just their willingness to share federal safety funds with the locals. Like Vic mentioned, about half of our fatal and serious injury crashes occur on the local system, primarily county roads. And MnDOT took what I think is kind of a tough step for a lot of states, which is targeting half of that money to go where those most severe crashes are occurring. So, and some of Vic's progress that he showed there as a result of that partnership, and also that willingness of MnDOT to kind of take that tough step in terms of sharing funds. So I'm going to talk about two areas. One's how DDSA can be used in alternatives analysis, and then get into some applications for design as well. So in the alternatives analysis, it's primarily the highway safety manual tools can be used to look at different alternatives, predict both numbers of crashes, but also numbers of crashes in terms of severity. So it can be a really useful tool during the NEPA process when you're looking at different alternatives. These are just kind of the different steps of the NEPA process shown in the yellow blocks there. But there's a number of those steps where this can be used. Even in the scoping time period, you can use some of these tools maybe in a less detailed manner to even inform, what are some of the alternatives that you should be looking at. Once you define those alternatives, the safety performance of those can be compared in a more quantitative manner, similar to how other things like operations, right-of-way impacts, construction cost, all those other elements have traditionally been quantified more during the project development process, and these tools finally give us a way to quantify safety as well. A little later in the process, when you start looking at some of the environmental and social and economic impacts, you may be looking at design exceptions, things like that. That's another place where these tools can help evaluate what's the safety implications of doing that. And then the final step, if you are going forward with things like design exceptions, how do you mitigate those? And some of the safety analysis tools can look at how effective that might be. So when might a more robust safety analysis be appropriate? You can use these tools at different levels. You can do quicker types of analysis, or you can get really detailed with the alignment and everything like that. So I guess what we suggest is if safety is fundamental to the purpose and need, that's where you might want to do a more detailed safety analysis. Projects that claim a safety benefit, where there's simply a substantial difference between the project alternatives that you're considering and also projects with an existing safety problems. Everyone can see this. So this is most of our examples we're bringing forth today are positive examples, but we do have one here that's I'll just say it's kind of a poor example, and this is from a NEPA document, an environmental assessment, I believe it was, and the primary purpose of the project was to improve the pavement structure. The pavement was in poor condition, and also the primary purpose was safety improvement. So if you look at how safety was, I guess, not quantified for this project, the no build alternative was just characterized as poor. Narrow shoulders, steep slopes, so forth and so on. And then there was three alternatives that were considered. All of them went off on different alignments of different extent, and the safety performance was categorized in the NEPA document as good, good, and good. So that doesn't help you much, I guess. you know, the cost difference between those three alternatives went from 17.3 million to 21.6 million. So how does that help you discern, you know, really where's, you know, which direction to go there? And I would add too, even between the no build option and alternative one, I can't tell how much safety improvement that's giving me. Maybe if that's not giving me as much safety benefit as I'm looking for, there's another option, alternative that I should be adding there somewhere between the no build and the $17.3 million option. So these tools make it, you know, we can really predict what the expected number of and severity of crashes should be for those alternatives, and so that's where we'd like to see the NEPA process go, or if it's not an EIS or something like that, just even in scoping and things, and when you're looking at different alternatives. Okay, and this is an example from New Jersey, and we're going to play a video, I think, of this one that can explain it better than I can, having not been on this project. But just a little bit of background. Was there, well, maybe does the video have the background?
I think so.
Okay. I just escaped that.
That's all right.
Okay.
Should be. This was a project that came about and really had great partnerships. The Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission is the MPO in that area. They worked with the New Jersey DOT and Burlington County on this project.
In New Jersey, federal, state, and local officials are using an innovative approach to make area roads safer and more efficient. The team, including members of the New Jersey Department of Transportation, the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission, or DVRPC, and Burlington County officials, worked together to secure funding for a modern roundabout at a rural intersection. They used data-driven safety analysis to justify the investment. Data-driven safety analysis is the application of the latest generation of tools for analyzing crash and roadway data. These tools quantify safety, so you can make more informed safety management and project development decisions. You can then better target highway safety investments and reduce the number of severe crashes on your roadways.
The difference with data-driven safety analysis is we have a way to be much more precise. We have a way to look at the nuances of a design and really make a prediction.
The DVRPC had identified the intersection for possible improvement, but modern roundabouts were relatively new in the region. As such, the Federal Highway Administration encouraged the DVRPC and the county to analyze the expected safety performance of the roundabout to determine its true safety benefit. The team used predictive tools from the Highway Safety Manual to quantify the expected safety performance of several design alternatives, including stop signs and traffic signals. The analysis showed that the modern roundabout was the most beneficial choice.
To ensure that it was a good investment of public dollars, they wanted a highway safety manual analysis to determine its cost benefit. Data-driven analysis is a great way to establish your need and to provide evidence that it's a good investment.
The project is complete, and the safety results speak for themselves.
The roundabout is just a proven safety countermeasure. The one that's completed, it has reduced the number of accidents to 0 since the day it opened.
The success of this effort has led to others.
I think this project happened due to a willingness to embrace new tools. Many of the tools that were used on this project were the first time for this particular county. Many lessons have been learned, and they've taken what they've learned and they've exercised those tools in other locations.
I will recommend it to everyone because it gives you confidence in your decisions. It's not that you are just throwing dot in the air. It's giving you what you should be expecting after you do the improvement. So it gives me confidence in my decision making.
Data-driven safety analysis can help you make more informed safety decisions about your projects. You can then better target investments and reduce the number of serious and fatal crashes on your roadways.
Yeah, so this was, more of a I guess, higher cost reactive type project. There was a school bus collided with a dump truck on this project, so it had a lot of press and emotional issues involved. But I think this is another example of how these tools can also help with communicating with the public, especially as they mentioned in the video, this was a location where they weren't real familiar with roundabouts, hadn't used roundabouts a lot. And the initial reaction was let's put up a signal right away, so that so it's these tools are really helpful for, I think, talking with local elected officials and the public as well.
It really helped diffuse the situation,
Yeah.
Everyone with a driver's license is a traffic engineer, right? And so they all knew that signal was the right answer. There was obviously some reluctance by the agencies, but they got involved and said, all right, let's use this to help show the data and let the traveling public and the elected officials see the difference in these tools. So credit to those guys. This was actually a location that the MPO had identified for roundabout before. They weren't sure about it. They said, well, there's development going in, and we're not sure this is a good location to try our first roundabout. And then that serious crash happened. So.
Okay, and just another final example, I guess, from Louisiana DOT, and this was for an EIS where they were looking at expanding a 2-lane undivided roadway to a 4-lane divided highway, and really just looked at a number of different alignments, and then they quantified, the crash cost using highway safety manual analysis, or I guess in this case they probably used the interactive highway safety design model, which is a software package that kind of makes this a little bit more efficient, where you can bring your CAD files, your design files right into this tool, and it uses the models in that way. This was a project, as I understand it, that was led by the Army Corps of Engineers, and ultimately they selected alternative Q there, which, as you can see, didn't have the lowest reduction in crashes as compared to some of the other alternatives, but as we mentioned earlier, it's a way to bring safety into this decision-making process in a more quantitative way. You wouldn't necessarily, obviously, just choose the one that has the lowest number of crashes, as there's other parts of that decision. Okay. All right. Next, I'll get into any comments or questions on that. I'm not big on lecturing, so if you guys have any comments, I'd welcome them. And I'm going to get into performance-based practical design, Jim, which I know is of interest to both you and I here. And so two applications of DDSA I want to talk about. Just briefly, more design exceptions. I want to focus more on performance-based practical design. If you're not familiar with that term, I guess I would just summarize it as, getting away from the traditional approach of choosing design values from standards tables or road design manuals, the AASHTO Green Book, and going to a more analysis-based design approach to choose those values and make those design decisions. I think there's a great deal of potential to use DDSA in combination with performance-based practical design, because the ultimate outcome is it can result in much more cost-effective projects, which you can use on other parts of your system and really optimize your system. So this is a big topic in Minnesota right now. It's one I feel strongly about and strongly support. But I think it's one of those areas where you really do need to use these tools to really do it effectively. And my first project is more of a simple one from Northeast Arizona, where they're looking at, they had a 2-lane undivided roadway with very minimal shoulders, just 0 to 1 foot shoulders. And they just wanted to evaluate 2 alternatives, widening those shoulders to either 5 foot or 8 foot. And again, this is another example of some of the software tools available. Again, this is the Interactive Highway Safety Design Model, the one that allows you to import your CAD design files. If you look at the bottom graphic there, it shows the crash prediction numbers by segment. The red line is the existing condition with the very minimal shoulders. And then the green and blue lines show those two alternatives with the wider 5-foot and 8-foot shoulders. And what you can kind of see even graphically from this tool is there's a pretty big safety improvement from going from the no build to those other alternatives, but between the 5-foot and 8-foot alternatives, there's a very minimal difference in the safety improvement. You can just kind of see that from the very small difference between those expected crashes between segments. Okay. So this is this was some of the results that came out of the models. I'm going to just focus more on again, on the right-hand column, the percent reduction in crashes. Alternative A, which was the 5-foot shoulders, about a 16% crash reduction. And alternative B with the 8-foot shoulders, about a 21% crash reduction. So the 8-foot shoulders, obviously, as you would expect, did have the greatest reduction in crashes. But when you bring cost into the equation, this is what Arizona DOT found, was that between construction and ongoing costs, alternative A with the 5-foot shoulders was actually more cost effective. It had a benefit cost ratio of 2.3 as compared to 1.9 for the 8-foot shoulder alternative. So you can see how this can be used to make more cost effective projects. And another benefit of using those tools is, they just looked at 2 options here, but once you've got that alignment and traffic data entered into those models, you could really look at kind of a vast array of different design dimensions. You could look at different lane widths, different shoulder widths, different combinations of the two, and really try to optimize a design. And I've got another performance-based practical design coming up, which is a little more complicated than that one. But first on design exceptions, for those that aren't aware, Federal Highway has changed the number of controlling criteria that require design exception from 13 down to 10. And actually, that's just for roadways posted 50 miles per hour or higher. If it's posted 45 miles per hour or less, there's actually just 2 controlling criteria, which are design speed and structural capacity. So design flexibility is something we've definitely been promoting at Federal Highway. This change in the controlling criteria and design exceptions is, I think, one very tangible thing that's come forth recently to promote that. But again, these tools can help you make good design decisions in terms of whether or not a design exception is a smart thing to do or not. Another thing that's been done here in Minnesota is over the last several years is we've expanded the ranges of design criteria to more closely match, the broader ranges that are in the AASHTO Green Book, give designers more freedom, more flexibility. But again, it makes design a little more complicated than choosing values out of road design manuals and in standards tables, and that's where these tools can help you make those tougher decisions. And Missouri DOT is kind of one state that has kind of a model design exception process where if the proposed design exception is expected to impact safety, they actually require a highway safety manual analysis be done to discern if that's a smart thing to do or not. And this helps in a lot of ways. It shows a thoroughness in your process. If your decision's ever questioned by someone internally in your agency, you've got good support there in terms of why you're doing this design exception. If it's questioned externally through a tort claim or whatever, I can't think of a better way to show both a thoroughness in your process, support for your decision, than to have that safety analysis there to back up your design exception and So I think can really help in that area. Okay, so back to performance-based practical design. So again, it's looking at really using an analysis to make design decisions and to result in more cost-effective projects. And I'm going to use, I like examples, and this is one that Jim Rosenau and I were both at least somewhat involved with, this example here. So this is a high volume, I guess I'd call it a signalized expressway here in the Twin Cities, kind of the northwest part of the metro, Anoka and Ramsey, if you're familiar with the Twin Cities at all. And numerous studies were done, and they all kind of looked at a freeway vision for this corridor, which is about 7 miles in length. A lot of tough constraints. There's a BNSF rail line that closely parallels the highway on the north side. Lots of access points. Lots of expensive right-of-way that would need to be purchased if you go the full freeway route. And the cost estimate to do a full freeway through this 7-mile corridor was $300 million. So what this, I'll call it a performance-based practical design study looked at, was really just taking a step back from that freeway vision and looking at lower cost projects or groups of projects that could achieve most of those both safety and operational benefits, but for much less cost. So some of those in the bottom, it's a little bit grainy, but in that bottom layout, some of these were kind of, okay. So this layout here looked at kind of some alternative at-grade solutions. Some others still maintain some grade separation over the highway and over the railroad, but instead of a full freeway, kind of brought them into right-in, right-out connections. So still maintain that kind of expressway type facility. And then they broke it into kind of groups of projects like I talked about, immediate priority projects, short-term, mid-term. But if you look through the mid-term priority projects, the cost of those, I guess it's right here, the cost of those added up to about $100 million instead of $300 million for the full freeway vision. And but it still achieved about 90% of the operational benefit of the full freeway vision. So a really good example of performance-based practical design. And then they did the same thing with safety. They quantified kind of cumulatively how much safety benefit could be achieved by implementing those groups of projects on this corridor. And again, if you go up through the green line through the midterm priority projects, the total cost of those groups of projects amounted to about $100 million, so about a third of the cost of the full freeway vision, but it still achieved, based on the safety analysis, about 90% of the safety benefit. So a really good study, and it shows how, I guess, some of the potential, if you combine data-driven safety analysis with performance-based practical design, how you can really achieve most of the benefits for much less cost. Jim, any comments from being involved in that project at all? Or I don't mean to put you on the spot, but
Well, you did.
okay.
No comments. Actually.
All right. Okay, we'll move on. How are we doing for time, Jerry? Do you want to keep? About 15 minutes. Okay. So finally, we'll get into just a few things related after, in construction operations and maintenance. I guess we don't have a lot in here in terms of construction. One thought I had is if your state does alternate technical concepts that come in from contractors, some of those ideas can be evaluated with some of these safety analysis tools. So a few that we'd like to focus on a little more related to operations is interstate access requests, intersection control evaluation, which the New Jersey case study was certainly an example of that, and performance management. So in terms of interstate access requests, there is a policy point 3 that requires that states kind of analyze operations and safety and prove that it won't have a significant adverse impact on the operation of the interstate facility. Traditionally, I think the divisions feel like we've always gotten pretty good information in terms of the operational impacts, but the safety evaluation of IARs has always been a little more subjective. Maybe not as subjective as that NEPA example I had, but you know, more along those lines. So what we'd like to see with IARs is a more quantitative type evaluation of safety. And even for big projects, there's a new part of the Highway Safety Manual now that can model even freeway and complex interchange types of projects. So kind of the point of this slide is, you know, there's some major costs of these freeway projects and systems interchanges like you see here. And when you're spending hundreds of millions of dollars on these projects, I guess the question that we would pose is, you know, shouldn't we know how these different alternatives compare to each other in terms of safety? Shouldn't we know what their safety performance is expected to be before making that kind of massive investment? And this is a project where they did use it on a systems interchange in Dublin, Ohio. So again, besides operations and construction costs, environmental impacts, right away, safety was able to be brought into the decision-making process on this project. And so this was an uncalibrated model, but that was, you know, a lot of times when you're just comparing alternatives like this, an uncalibrated model can do the job. You're really just looking at relative differences in safety. And they were focused really on the types of crashes that Vic was talking about, the fatal and serious injury type crashes. And looks like, oh. So it looks like in this case, the one with the lowest number of expected crashes was the alternative that was chosen on this particular interchange. So kind of the takeaway here is that there's models now for even these very complex types of freeway and interchange designs. So I'll just talk a little bit more about intersection control evaluation because it's another place where there's a lot of potential. You know, on the New Jersey example, they just looked at a roundabout versus a signal. But in Minnesota, we're looking at a lot of different types of intersections. Vic showed me a video of a continuous green T that he just built in St. Louis County. We've been using a lot of U-turn types of intersections, mini roundabouts in addition to just regular roundabouts. So this is a way that, you know, instead of just kind of defaulting to intersection types that you're comfortable with or have traditionally used in the past, where you can bring in a lot of these different newer types of intersections and compare the safety performance of those. Here's just a list of states with ICE policies. Minnesota, we've had ours in place for quite a while, but it's kind of becoming a more common thing across the country to really do a more robust safety evaluation of intersection types and kind of broaden the array of the types of intersections that you consider. An example from Washington DOT's ICE policy. So it looks like they just use the HSM models. Some of these, one point I would mention is some of these newer types of intersections will not have like a full-blown safety performance function that you can use. I'm sure your continuous green T does not have a safety performance function, but you know, at the minimum you can look at crash modification factors and things like that. We've got enough restricted crossing U-turn intersections now in Minnesota. I think 13 have been built, you know, that we even have enough kind of preliminary data of our own that we can, kind of use some of that to make do some of this analysis. Performance management certainly became a bigger part of the federal aid program with the passage of MAP 21. These are the seven areas where performance management will come into play and targets will be set and measured and so forth. And this is an example from Illinois, and perhaps Illinois can help me out on explaining this. But my understanding here on how they develop some of their more maintenance type projects is they look at the condition rating for structures. They look at roughness indexes for their pavement condition, and then they have a safer roads index, which brings safety into the equation in terms of how some of these projects are developed and scoped. And just going to go to this last graphic here, but I think it's, so if you look at this segment here, red is identified as an opportunity area where safety performance is not as high as it is expected to be. The condition rating of the structures in that segment too is lower, and then the pavement condition or the roughness index showing more of a moderate level of issue there. Yeah, go ahead.
So with that, what we did was we developed safety performance functions for all of our state routes and intersections, and intersections are state and local. But, and then, so we developed, so every road has a safety or potential for safety improvement rating number based on severe crashes and its safety performance. And so, and then they were put into buckets so that their 5% are the critical, high, medium, low, and minimal. And you actually, between the critical / 5%, high and medium, you get about 50% of our fatalities and serious injuries, and about 25%, I want to say 25% of the mileage. And, but anyway, so when we did this, you can, if you look at I'll just move forward real quick here, if that's okay. Yeah, that works. You want me to do this? Yeah. Yeah, so if we look at this, is it working, or am I off the radar? Oh, here we go. So if I look at these two roadway segments and the safety performance, this has a high potential for safety improvement, so meaning it has a significant number of severe crashes, where this one has a low, it's minor, safety performance. Now if I come over to the pavement condition, this is very poor. And this here is in fair condition. And if we come back over here and you say, okay, this is in fair condition and this is in fair, if we were evaluating those two roadway segments as far as which project should be moving forward, so this could be interstate resurfacing, it could be just a rural 2-lane road, the safety performance here of this road, again, comparing these two, and you're looking at pavement condition as well, would elevate that up and move it forward. So it lets safety be an equal component into the consideration of project selection. And then actually the way our district utilizes it, they get a score or points added for safety, points added for condition and ADT and other type of items. And so then that, again, makes it move it forward. So it's kind of a network screening, but it also kind of can come into our performance metrics. And so our goal is, where we say we want 90% of our roads to be in fair, good condition, we can also say, well, we want this percentage of roads to be in the low to minimal safety performance area, which means is, it's performing similar to its peers. So like interstates being compared to interstate, and rural and urban, that type of thing.
Perfect. Yeah, I think it's also a good example of empowering the districts themselves to be safety champions, right, and using this information. So it's not something we just keep in a group of 4 people in central office. We're getting this out to the districts. So I think it's a great example. I also point out, too, that their district's folks are measured not only on how much asphalt they lay and construct and bridges they reconstruct, but also safety as part of their evaluation criteria, that their performance measures, I guess, for the employees. So.
And one thing, Jerry, I forgot to mention, so we did this for state roads. We're in the process now of doing this for all of our local roads.
Yeah.
Our MPOs and our local agencies really like this. And so we have a 5% list for our local agencies, but this will take it to this more robust.
That's awesome. Getting the locals on this too for the Safe Road Index. That's something that a lot of states have been interested. So I've been sharing your information to many other states as that's come up. So can't wait to see your next round with the local agencies. So we'll just touch on the resources quick, and I won't take too much time. I showed this slide before. Like I said, we've got a lot of states that have advanced or have at least tried these methods. We expect and hope that they'll take these to the next level of getting them to what we call the assessment level or above, and particularly for local agencies that haven't tried them to do a little bit more. So you'll see this. If you're familiar with EDC, you know we have different levels, and really an assessment, we want you to start incorporating this in your policies and procedures, maybe assessing where it can be improved upon, what tweaks might be needed of the innovation to institutionalize it as the final goal. So we have a number of resources that are out there, fact sheets and case studies. I put on your table, I forgot to mention the infographic. It gives just a little bit kind of a takeaway that if you're familiar with how this might work, it talks about the health screening that Victor Lung did such a nice job talking about. The other side has the project development process where we think this has an application in your existing procedures. So we've got a number of videos. You saw one of those. You'll see one at lunch. But we have a lot of material since we've been around that if you guys need presentations, if you need an exhibit booth, we have all those things. We do about a webinar almost monthly on different topics. We did one recently on just kind of the EDC4 kickoff. We had 46 states, DC and Puerto Rico that participated in that, and also Alberta, Canada that tuned in. And so we've been reaching up to 300 and some people in different webinars. We do webinars kind of geared for planners to operations engineers. So let us know if you have topics you're interested in. I mentioned some of our videos and whatnot. The Minnesota one will be added tomorrow after we debut it here today. This is our exhibit booth. We're certainly looking for opportunities for national or regional conferences. If you know of something that we can get out to, we have a video screen that shows videos, but we can do live demonstrations of tools such as the interactive highway safety design model. So we want to get out there. I mentioned our webinars. We've got more webinars that are coming up, so you'll be seeing those soon. Particularly November 2nd is our next one that's coming up. So we've got some new guidance documents. We talked just a little bit about policies and procedures. We have a new guidance document. This should be posted yet this week called State Policies and Procedures on the Use of the Highway Safety Manual. So you'll see some examples. A lot of states were looking for help with that. Hey, how do we get this integrated in our policies? And so we looked around the country. We found 31 states that had examples, at least one policy or another, where they've got the Highway Safety Manual mentioned. We also looked in areas where we couldn't find good model language. We developed some draft language, and it's not something you can just take and place in your procedures, but hopefully a starting point, something to shoot holes at or take issues with and make it fit for your agency. So hopefully that helps the learning curve just a little bit. We've also got another one on scale and scope of safety assessment methods for the project development process. This will be forthcoming as well. In the next month we should have that done, which will have some great examples how you can apply it in your agency's procedures. It's got a lot of different charts and say, hey, if I'm in an alternatives analysis, here's what might be the proper level of analysis for this particular project, because there's always a scale and scope, and it really needs to be commensurate with that level of project. We don't want you to spend 200 hours on a very simple resurfacing project, so it can help with those kind of decisions. We've got free training available. We have a number of different training courses that are available. We've been to Minnesota. We're coming back for another course. I think we've been to almost every state here, maybe not North Dakota. I don't know if we've done a class there, but these are free of charge. We're inviting folks to participate in those. We ask that you provide a training room for us, but we can certainly do those courses. We invite you to invite your consultant and local communities as you want. We're not charging anything for these seats, so whoever's doing projects in your state, we want them to have a chance to participate. So. And we really have free technical assistance. We can help with anything on the project or program levels that you want. We've reached a number of states. How many states have reached out to Federal Highways for assistance through this program? we've got 43 states that have done some things. So yeah, we're helping Indiana right now. Is Indiana in the room? I thought we had somebody. Yeah, we're helping right now with a major project that you guys have, a freeway project with IHSDM analysis that's going on. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with that project, but I tell you more, but I can't remember. So we've got a lot going on. There's a number of different programs, and you guys have heard about some of the funding opportunities. Beth was talking about the aid demonstration program. Those are about $1 million, up to $1 million per project. So data analysis is not precluded from being part of that. So if you have a project, maybe you've got a unique project like a U.S. Highway 10 access study, there might be some opportunities to try some of these tools. So the stick funds, we've had a number of states that have used stick funds to help provide some of the software products. They've used it for hosting analysis workshops, conventions, those kind of things. So that's certainly something you can do. Also to do state level training if you want to reach your agencies within the state. And also the increased project share too if you were going to use these things. So I mentioned we have a very big team. They're listed here. You probably can't read that, but we'll also take questions from you guys. So in the time we have remaining, anything you guys want to discuss more of? Jim.
I'd like to ask you. All right, I've got 2 unanswerable questions. I'll only ask one. Performance-based practical design. The mantra is understand the problem and then solve the problem that you know exists. If it's not broke, don't fix it, or if it's not broke, don't break it, or something like that. But Vic's presentation has kind of bended my mind. It's been kind of mind-bending because it presents the possibility that even if we don't have a problem, we may statistically anticipate a problem. And so it's tough because the counterpart to performance-based design is practical design, and that's being very money conscious. Nothing has served to bankrupt us more over the years than the phrase "as long as we're in there." So I've told people to avoid the "as long as we're in there" thing. But I mean, maybe what I'm hearing is that as long as we're in there are some things that we should look at correcting, even if there's not a substantive problem. So I guess I've never been more confused in my life. Thanks, guys.
Do you guys want to try that first?
Vic might have a few comments too. Jim, my distinction there is Vic's not going out and proactively putting in really expensive solutions. Like if there's a high-risk intersection, and you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think he's going in there and putting in $1.5 million roundabouts sort of proactively. He's really focused on those low-cost countermeasures that he can spread out on as many of your, was it 3,000 miles or as possible. So to me, that's where the distinction is. I guess I personally would not support sort of proactively putting in a several $1 million intersection solution if there's not a problem there. If there is a problem there, then I would. And then focus those proactive things on the low-cost things that you can really spread out on as many high-risk locations as you can.
The one thought that comes to my mind real quick is, just like Will had said, we're low-cost, proactive focus. We don't have enough money to reconstruct all of our intersections. We're thinking in terms of hundreds of dollars per mile, thousands of dollars per intersection, not hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars. So the comprehensive approach would say we need both. But the way I look at it, I can get a great benefit for hundreds of dollars an intersection. We're going to focus on that.
Yeah, I think they answered that pretty good. I won't spend much time on it, but I think that's where some of the countermeasures come into effect too. Maybe you can't get optimal shoulder width, but we know from a safety perspective we're not going to see a big degrade from that. Maybe we put in rumble strips or enhanced edge lines or something like that to help mitigate that difference in pavement. The reality is, we don't have the money to build everything to full standards a lot of times. And so instead of doing 10 miles, we're going to do 5 miles, right? If we have to build to full standards, or so if you can save that money on this project, if that helps us promote another safety project and we see a net benefit, then that's a good thing. I firmly believe in my lifetime we'll still see, right now we talk about nominal safety being our standards-based versus our performance-based standards. I think you're going to see a culmination of where the Highway Safety Manual and the Green Book come together, and that performance-based is all your design standards, right? So always looking at the context of the situation and what's going on. Are we going to get it perfect? No, but that's when we're going to have multiple versions, revisions to those documents. So the more we know, the better we can do. So I think we'll see that. So any other thoughts on that, or other questions folks want to discuss? We're getting close to lunchtime, but I think we've got a little time to mosey back. So got one in the back.
Just a quick, more of a technical question for Vic in relationship to the systematic approach as opposed to the location-specific approach. When you do the evaluation, which plays directly into prioritization, what did you find most successful, especially on a system your large, for defining your segments? What was the basis for that? How did you define those segments so that you could do that prioritization evaluation?
And I apologize, just so I can get your question better. Are you thinking about risk factors? What risk factors are we looking at, or features of the roadway?
No, not all the features. Just if you took 3,000 miles and you evaluate a mile versus 400 miles, that'll affect your prioritization.
Okay, great question. So it's a segmentation approach, because you have to break your system up. Quick answer: the County Road Safety Plan in Minnesota did 3 things. We broke up the system into 3 categories: segments, curves, and intersections. Okay, then we prioritize those. Now segments, that's to get a little gray area. You have to figure out, is it a mile, 5 miles, 10 miles? We had to think subjectively. We had to look at natural breakpoints, and we did that. But then curves and then intersections, those are very well defined. So then it's just a question of finding those risk factors that are correlated to those locations and then prioritizing the system. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. So it's more of a evaluation based on what you saw as a system. It might be a 5-mile segment. It might be a 10-mile segment based on.
Yep, but the key is that unlike using crash rates, which would vary greatly, the values would be greatly different from like a 5-mile to a 1-mile possibly. We're using risk factors, or their characteristics or physical features of those locations. Okay, so it isn't a density; it's do you have it or not.
I think that's where the tools can come in to help too. They do a lot of that segmentation now for you, and you can do some sensitivity analysis. Do we break into 1-mile sections, half-mile section, 5-mile sections, and see how that affects your results. So that's certainly something important to look at, though. Other thoughts, questions? You guys ready for lunch? All right, let's do that. All right, thank you very much for your participation today.